The video game industry, just like the movie industry, the sports industry, or the industry, is largely dominated by men. Now, since 2009, the amount of female developers in video games has more than doubled to 22%, which is fantastic. However, they still make up less than a quarter of the business. Overall, women make up about 14% of the people working in the entire industry. What's worse is that female characters star in less than 10% of all video games, which is about the same percentage of women Joe Biden tries to scratch and sniff. There's a lot of reasons for this sausage fest. Historically, the field has been dominated by men, which makes advancement in that framework difficult for women, not to mention people of different gender identities. And having only men working on a medium for generations produces some unsurprising results. Which unfortunately creates a bit of a feedback loop because maybe people don't want to spend years training to get into an industry that hypersexualizes and underrepresents them. Already I can see the chain reaction, the chemical precursors that signal the onset of an emotion, designed specifically to overwhelm logic and reason. An emotion that is already blinding you from the simple and obvious truth. That starting a flame war in the comment section will only increase our engagement and signal boost this video further. But hey, we can talk your language. Are you prepared for the most in-depth, brutally honest, comprehensive, exhausting, and downright beaten horse to death extreme sponsored by Mountain Dew Moisturizer analysis of Gamergate? Yeah, us neither. This episode isn't here to explore Gamergate, start a flame war, or even change the world. We're leaving all of that to Charlie Kirk.
Where's Charlie? Where are you, Charlie? Charlie, where's Charlie? Where is he? What a great... The man. He's like 14 years old. I can't believe...
We're here today to explore some of the first portrayals of women in video games and pay respect to the trailblazers who became pioneers in the industry. After all, women now make up 50% of all gamers, and it's never too late for a little herstory lesson.
Now, unless we can apply sexuality to the paddles and balls in Pong, the first true female protagonist in a video game appeared in 1981's Ladybug. The game was a mild homage/ripoff of Pac-Man that featured a ladybug walking around a maze eating up dots while avoiding contact with other insects. What made it unique was the paddleboard system that allowed you to block off paths from incoming enemies. What's bizarre is that the second female protagonist in a video game is also Pac-Man related, this time in an enhancement that eventually blossomed into Miss Pac-Man.
Hey Joey, what's she really like?
She's the most exciting woman I ever met.
Yeah?
Atari introduces the Woman of the Year, Ms. Pac-Man. Just like the arcade classic, 4 different game screens, floating fruit, even pretzels.
Don't you know I'm more than Pac-Man with a bow? In Jesus' name, I pray.
Taking an enhancement for the game called Crazy Auto, the development team changed the sprites to feature a female protagonist. In 1982, Pac-Man became one of the first commercially successful video games to be played by a majority of women. Stan Jarocki of Midway stated that Ms. Pac-Man was conceived in response to the original Pac-Man being the first commercial video game to involve large numbers of women as players, and that it is our way of thanking all those lady arcaders who have played and enjoyed Pac-Man. Say what you will about female-driven games not being as commercially successful, but at the time, Ms. Pac-Man was the best-selling American-made arcade game in the world. The game was faster and more difficult than the original, presenting an enhanced challenge.
Man, no, Clyde tried to bite Pac-Man. Clyde bite Pac-Man! Why Clyde bite Pac-Man?
It was also in the early 80s that Carol Shaw and Donna Bailey made waves for becoming the first female video game developers, despite the handicap of not having penises.
I knew that I wasn't nearly as technically experienced as many of the guys that I worked with, but I knew that I was one of maybe a handful of women in America who had had assembly language experience at all, and I felt like that made me one of the most qualified women in America.
The footage you are watching is from a 1978 prototype called Polo.
a horse. It's a little hard to tell, but here's like the horse and here's the player. That's Polo, and despite the fact that it wasn't released, this is still, for all intents and purposes, that we can find the first video game released for a major company that was designed and programmed by a woman.
Carol went on to create some timeless classics like Happy Trails and River Raid.
River Raid, designed by Carol Shaw for Activision.
Donna would go on to co-create one of the most popular arcade games of all time, Centipede.
It came out sort of because I don't like spiders. That's a lot of how that happened. And the spider in that is very cartoonish and mischievous and just irritating, really. And I liked, having my way over a spider.
Around the same time as Centipede's release, female protagonists began to appear in a few more games. In 1985, Sega released the first female action hero, Ninja Princess. While this was a huge step forward, a strong female hero must have broken a few people's brains because she was transformed into a male character for the home console release. Despite changing the protagonist from a woman to a man, the title became Ninja Princess Mega Ban Ninja, perhaps becoming the first non-binary video game character in the process. While the Ninja Princess was a powerful warrior, she was unfortunately a victim of over-sexualization. Female characters, even when they're a lead, are often sexualized. Now don't worry, gentlemen, the left has no intention of taking any of this away from you. You should be free to enjoy as much digital titties as you want, and frankly up to this point your cup run is over. We're just saying this shouldn't be the only way women are portrayed, and seeing a non-hentai proportion body type doesn't really hurt anyone.
Let's do this.
And while male characters often get stuck in the Adonis stereotype themselves, they're typically not waging war in thongs. Other notable titles included the space warrior Baraduk and 1984's progressive masterpiece Barbie. In 1996, Tomb Raider was released for the Sony PlayStation and featured the British protagonist Lara Croft in what would become one of the most recognizable female characters in any variety of media. This was in large part due to a successful film adaptation starring Angelina Jolie.
I'm only trying to turn you into a lady. And a lady should be modest.
Yes, a lady should be modest.
She's not a Christian!
Obviously, her depiction was problematic from the get-go, and eventually her character became more of a pin-up than a superhero. It wasn't until 2015 that she was redesigned to be less sexualized. While infrequent, there have been other notable female protagonists, including Faith Connors in Mirror's Edge, Clementine in the second season of The Walking Dead, and Ellie in The Last of Us Left Behind.
Back to the women behind the women. Now, most of you will probably be too young to remember Sierra Games or even the point-and-click adventure genre, but in the mid-80s to early 90s, it was one of the most popular genres in video games. The biggest company behind it was co-founded by a woman named Roberta Williams. No, not Robin Williams' long-lost twin, but rather a programming genius responsible for some of the most beloved series of all time.
Basically, what intrigued me was the fact that since I am a storyteller, and I've always been a storyteller, was the fact that this was another dimension beyond just a book or a movie, the fact that you could interact with a story and somehow control, or at least get the feeling that you are controlling the story.
Space Quest, King's Quest, Onion King Quest. Okay, the last one was fake. Or was it? Since their mainstream adoption, the charge has been long levied that video games lack captivating storylines or narrative-driven content. That may seem unusual today, where we take for granted the emotional impact that certain scenes can leave with us.
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
Point-and-click adventure games, which are an evolution of early text titles for PC and DOS, were the earlier examples of story and characters being more important than gameplay or graphics. Sierra was home to some of the most beloved franchises in the genre, and a large collection of the best-selling titles were co-created by a woman. That brings us to the most breakthrough female protagonist in the history of video games.
宇宙征服の野望が渦巻く行け宇宙戦士サムスファミリーコンピュータディスクカードにアクション&メールゲーム
In 1986, Nintendo released Metroid for the NES. It was a revolutionary game that featured true open-world exploration that allowed gamers to choose a quasi-non-linear path to the end. It also featured multiple endings, something that would later become a staple in the industry. But all that being tossed aside, what it truly revolutionized was the fact that if you beat Metroid in under 5 hours, you would be rewarded with the biggest twist ending in video games history. You had been playing as a woman the entire time. Nowadays, this scandal isn't even enough to make Bill Cosby get out of his prison bed. Back in the 1980s, it was a shell shock. Playing as a man the entire time seemed natural, and even the instruction booklet referred to Samus as a he. The hero was a space marine who was kicking ass and chewing space bubblegum.
I've come here to chew ass and kick bubblegum. And I'm all out of gum.
Flipping the entire script on its head by turning the protagonist into a woman went a long way to shatter gender stereotypes. The developing team claimed it had been heavily influenced by the film Alien and thought it would be a great twist to reveal the hero had been a woman the entire time. Now, nearly 20 years later, there have been some positive steps in the right direction for female characters, but there's still a massive way to go. And no, we're not man-hating eunuchs parading around as woke soy flakes, we're as red-blooded as the next cuck. But we can only speak for the heterosexual male population that plays these things. And as we mentioned before, nearly half of gamers are women. That doesn't even put into account gay or transgender players who have virtually no representation in games at all. And to the women who have battled to break through the glass ceiling, which in this industry is more like a glass penis, I thank you for giving us great gaming adventures and hopefully a lot more to come.
It's amazing what's happened in the last 35 years in the game business since when I was doing it. So thanks a lot for this honor, and thank you.
We'd like to give a very special thank you to Kyle C. and Ricky Pilgrim. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for helping make the show possible. And to all our patrons, you are the backbone of this entire series. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be able to make any of this. So thank you so much. If any of you are considering donating or joining for as little as $1, we release all the content early. We do a lot of exclusive content only available on the Patreon. We also donate all the props that we make for the show to the Patreoners, and we give out other swag and t-shirts and other stuff like that. So yeah, come join.
All right, thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you.
Keep watching the rest of our videos, subscribe, stuff. I'm bad at this.
Keep stuff, yeah.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the videos, everybody.
Thank you.
We've got a lot more of these on the channel. You can, subscribe, hit the bells, like, comment, share, check out the stuff on the Patreon. Yeah, have a good one.
Bravo, this was the 20th take.